Great. So, so basically today we actually happy we actually have 3 presenters. So we will have the first presenter would be Professor Sandi Maya Gaspay from University of Philippines-Diliman. She will talk about cycling in Manila. And then the second one, it would be Professor Prateek Bansal from National University of Singapore. He will talk about the how actually people behavior in interacting with these automated vehicles. And at the end, we will have Professor Prawira Fajarindra Belgiawan from IATBR to talk about this aerial mobility. So without any further ado, Sandy, would you like to start? Currently, you are still mute.
All right. Yes. Okay. Okay, so I hope everyone can see my presentation. Right?
Yes.
So can I start? Okay. All right. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to Professor Susilo for inviting me to this webinar. And yeah, I'm very happy to share our work on understanding cyclists in Metro Manila. And we've compared this to previous data from 10 years before. So anyway, let me start. So just a quick background on our study area. So Metro Manila, or the National Capital Region, it is the economic, political, and educational center of the Philippines, and it has the highest contribution to the GDP. So it has a high population, 13.4 million, and it is composed of 17 cities. So if you can just imagine how complex the administration of Metro Manila is, because it has so many governments involved in it. And of course, it's the location of the major airport and seaport as well. So lots of economic activity happening. In terms of motorization, so Metro Manila is in the list of cities with high congestion levels. So from 2011 to 2019, a 53% increase in registered motor vehicles was observed, and the majority of those are motorcycles. So now we are seeing a very significant increase in motorcycle levels. Yeah, according to a study by JICA, around $69.1 million per day is lost due to congestion. So, so the government knows about this and is worried about this, and that's why the Philippine government has embarked on this infrastructure program. So actually, we have around 20-year delay in our infrastructure. So we didn't set up our rail systems early on. So we are trying to catch up. So it's called from 2016, this 2015, I think, Build program. So Metro Manila is on its way to getting its first subway, improving its railway system. So I think I forgot how many kilometers of rail was going to be added, and also a revamp of its transport system. So we have this public utility vehicle modernization program. So in summary, there are a lot of things being done, and the current administration is continuing this with the Build Better More program. So continuing all these infrastructure programs. So but despite these, yeah, we are experiencing a lot of congestion. Public transport service levels are not good, and the pandemic actually provided what we would call a window of opportunity to improve sustainable transport policies. And one of these is the expansion of establishing the bicycle network in Metro Manila. So because of the pandemic, there were, well, this is common in many cities, there were restrictions in the capacity of public transport. So many people opted to use their own vehicles, and those, who did not have cars, opted to use bicycles. And we did see an uptake in bicycle use, bicycle imports. And when the pandemic sort of stabilized, the public transport demand went back to normal, and actually maybe it will have worsened to some degree. So for Metro Manila's bicycle network expansion, part of the laws implementing COVID support provided funds for the establishment of a bicycle networks in various cities, so Metro Manila, Cebu, and Davao. So the guidelines for establishing bicycle lanes were based on the average traffic and also the speed, and there were 3 classes. So class 1 is completely separated from the carriageway. Class 2 is something like this. It's on the carriageway, but it's protected by bollards or some barriers. And the class 3 is, I would say, maybe one of the most common. It's only paint and it's shared roadway. So something looking like this. So it's the cycling situation, I would say it's not so safe at the moment. A lot of class 3 types, because we're still dealing with, how to share the road effectively. But yes, road diets have been done around Metro Manila to accommodate cyclists. Okay, so the Metro Manila Bicycle Network, so using those funds, that was around $19.8 million US. In Metro Manila, what they did was they tried to connect the 17 cities, especially the major places of interest, such as the hospitals and the government offices. So around 379 kilometers, and also local governments, for example, Quezon City, one of the biggest cities, also tried to build its own bicycle lanes within the city, so 93 kilometers, I think, and more. And then I think one of the oldest networks was built way back in the year 2000 in Marikina. So as you can see, the red and the yellow, yeah, they have like spread out throughout Metro Manila. So several cycling related surveys have been conducted, but usually these are limited in terms of scope or limited within a certain area. So for our research, we plan to build on these studies that have been done and also contribute to the ongoing discourse on who the cyclists are and how do we meet their needs, how do we improve conditions for them. So our objective is really to better understand who the cyclists of Metro Manila are. We collected their socioeconomic status, trip characteristics, if they are new cyclists, meaning they just shifted to cycling because of the pandemic, what their access to cycling infrastructure is like. So this is a partnership with the Department of Transport. So we aim to help improve cycling infrastructure with our studies. So 10 years ago, this is probably one of the most comprehensive databases, transport databases in Metro Manila. 10 years ago, when they did when they looked at who the cyclists are, most of these were, for example, median age is 39, 85% are working, majority are male, so you have a 12-to-1 male to female ratio. Personal income, so I'm sorry, this is in peso, but basically these are blue-collar workers. So for example, majority are laborers or unskilled workers, so in the relatively low income bracket. And then most of them, majority did not own any car or motorcycle. And so we wanted to know, is this still the same, or is this has this evolved after 10 years? So we conducted two surveys. So first is a bicycle volume count in 9 locations, and then also cyclist interviews. So to ensure that our study sites are well distributed, so we assigned different clusters and used the data from 10 years ago, and also added our own analysis. So we were able to identify our sort of screen line survey sites. And then what we found, so I will just go through some of the salient points of our findings. So we were able to count around, I think, an average of 84 to 233 cyclists during the peak hours. So this is just the total volume. Still, a small percentage of the cyclists were females. And then these are the peak hours where we observed the high volume of cyclists. So most of them are cycling like really early in the morning. And then we also looked at the trends in helmet use. So around 62% of the cyclists wore helmets. And this is quite controversial because in some cities, they apprehended people without helmets. So we wanted to provide inputs to helmet policies. And what we found was that there was high helmet use, but only in areas with a helmet ordinance. And although we know that, you know, helmets are important for safety, some groups argue that by imposing these helmet policies, you are discouraging cycling. And for example, people are afraid of encountering law enforcement, etc. And then we also noticed that, you know, Metro Manila, Philippines, a hot country, so we see that helmet use decreases towards like lunchtime and then increases again in the evening. So consideration for, you know, weather conditions is also important. And then when we interviewed the different cyclists to check their socioeconomic characteristics, so we found that most of them graduated high school level only and below. 81% are employed. Most of them still do not own cars, though a higher percentage own motorcycles. And then they still belong to the lower income levels, lower income brackets. So this is like minimum wage level, so around 90+%. And then when we looked at the alternative mode that they use when they're not cycling, so most of them use the jeepney. So jeepney or UV Express, as you can see here in the photo. So basically, if there were people who shifted to cycling, they came from the public transport users and not necessarily the private transport users. So we are also interested in the cycling to work, or the utility cyclists, like those who cycle almost every day. And we found that, consistent with the low income bracket, so most of them work more than 5 days a week. So majority have a high frequency of cycling. And also in terms of distance, most of them cycled, I think, 1 to 2 hours one way. So it's quite the distance. And, you know, so that means cycling is not really like just a short distance type of trip for them. So we mapped this out using R, the origin and destination, and we plotted here the desire lines. And although it's not so clear, what you will see here is there's a lot of intercity travel. So in 2012, only 25% were intercity trips, but now, we notice around 56% cycled to destinations outside of the city where their trips originated. So I guess this kind of justifies the expansion of the intercity expansion of the cycling network, right? Apart from the within city infrastructure. And when we asked our respondents on the availability of, cycling support facilities like a locker or shower. So the most that is available is bicycle parking. Most of them said that there were no lockers or there are no showers. So they are cycling despite the availability of, these support infrastructure. And we kind of we were expecting that they will not be satisfied with the cycling infrastructure, but we were surprised that in terms of the routes that they chose, the green lines show the percentage of scores, 4 or 5 out of 5. So they are quite satisfied with, on an overall basis, they're quite satisfied with their route presence, and also the bicycle lane. They're quite satisfied with that. So next we looked at possible mode shift or the impact of COVID. So only 35% actually started cycling during the pandemic. And when we asked our respondents if they plan to change, the frequency, most of them, plan to continue cycling. So I guess most of them are also cyclists even before the pandemic. And we are interested also in those who want to discontinue cycling. So they said that, factors such as warm weather, physical ailments, because, they're traveling long distances, or the desire to shift to a motorcycle is actually a threat to the sustainability of cycling and public transport use. So that was quite alarming for us. So next is, what did we learn about, the Metro Manila cyclists? So from the socioeconomic statistics alone, we could see that most of them could be, captive users, or they don't have a choice but to cycle because of the travel costs, lower public transport reliability. And then, as you've seen, as I've explained, majority of them are from financially disadvantaged classes. They are cycling long distances and even cycling despite the lack of support facilities. We also saw that cyclists are still dominantly male. So this could say something about, the safety of, or the feeling of safety that people have over the cycling infrastructure. And it would be useful to ask more women why they are not cycling. And then last is the shift to cycling during the pandemic. We did see this shift to cycling, and most of them prefer to continue cycling, but we saw that motorcycles are a potential threat to cycling. So because of this finding on, there are a lot of people who may be captive to cycling, this also sparked our interest in, how to improve the existing infrastructure, so we can promote cycling further. So some of our other work is, for example, using multi-criteria analysis to identify where in the Metro Manila cycling network can improvements be done. So this is one of our research with my students. For example, we identify by subdividing the Metro Manila map into different grids and combining different available data, such as safety data, user inputs, etc. Different number of locations, potential locations or destinations. So we were able to recommend where we can improve the connections or improve the state of the cycling infrastructure. And then another work with some students as well is when we mapped out the location of low-income families in Metro Manila. So here you will see the high density of low-income families. You'll see that they are not connected to the bike lane. So the bike lane are the ones in color black. So these can also help the Department of Transport in planning better where to connect people more. And I guess another issue would be if the low-income families do have access to bicycles, maybe a rental program or some sort. So anyway, this is my last slide. So just some insights for future policies. As I mentioned, our study, we just want this to be a conversation starter, and we want to continue the discourse on how to improve cycling. Since cycling is a lifeline for many low-income citizens, we're actually asking this chicken and egg problem. So should we wait for a high demand before we improve our cycling infrastructure, or should it be the other way around? Or how about the access of non-cyclists to bicycles themselves? And also, how do we improve safety and connectivity of our cycling paths? Next is we also want to look at the low cycling rates of underrepresented groups. So why are there few women cyclists? How can we increase the shift from car or more motorcycle uses, or how do we prevent cyclists from how we discourage cyclists from shifting to motorcycles in the future? And finally, we noticed that there is not much data on this, so we had to conduct our own surveys. So continued data collection, proactive partnerships between the public and private sectors are, of course, important. So with this, I'd like to thank everyone, and we'll be happy to answer your questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Very interesting. And in Europe, actually, we also now have a huge push try to actually promote cycling as well in different cities, and in different countries actually go to have a different level of progress. And some this kind of chicken and egg problems is also some things that kind of we discussed earlier. Questions from the audience? Anybody has a questions? While waiting for other questions, probably can you the idea of this webinar is also for people from different parts of the world to also actually understand how travel behavior in different countries actually different. Even Philippines for Southeast Asia context, to my understanding, is very unique geographically, weather system wise, etc. Can in reflect to cycling, can you share with us what would be the local unique trait or culture that influence the choice of the mode? And also, what would be the challenges?
Okay, so yeah, I actually have been thinking about this, if they indeed have a choice. I mean, yeah, one of our theories is that they were kind of pushed into cycling, like they don't have a choice because, as I mentioned earlier, they're traveling far distances. It's really hot. It's not so safe. And so yeah, I think one, for example, the poor, for example, the infrastructure still needs to be improved. Public transport still needs to be improved. As to the attitudes, maybe for example, for lower levels of women cyclists, there is still some notion that cycling is for men. And they might get harassed. So some safety issues also, gender issues related to women cycling. I think what's interesting for the Philippines is we are now in a state of transition. So we are in a stage where we're trying to catch up with our backlog in terms of infrastructure. And I hope that we get to that stage of sustainable transport before people start shifting to motorcycle and start falling in love with the door-to-door travel. So I think that's one of the challenges that we have in the Philippines, how to intercept that the benefits of motorcycle use, because we are seeing alarming rates of increase here. So I hope that we don't get there.
In Indonesia, it's already happened. Probably also in
It's
Diliman.
almost happening. It's almost fully happening
Yeah.
here.
I have a questions from audience. The audience sent me a message. So basically, they asked if you could highlight the analysis technique that you have done, in particular, also how, and also whether you can talk a little bit more also about how did you collect the data, like sampling technique, etc.
Oh, okay. So for the sampling technique, we actually based it on the data that we used, the database that we had from 10 years ago. So because that was the only source of data that we have, and there was no like sort of existing like survey data on cyclists. So based on that, we looked at the high volume desire lines, and then and then we divided those into different clusters, um, geographical clusters, so that we can cover the north, east, west, and south. So with that, we used the Cube software to visualize the desire lines. And most of what I showed today, these are just, descriptive statistics for now. But eventually we plan to do like some route choice analysis, but we're not there yet.
Mm-hmm. There is also another questions of, is there any perceptions that bicycle is for lost status in Philippine society, and whether this actually affect more or discourage more affluent people to actually cycling?
Actually, I'm not sure if that notion exists, but from what I see on social media, the people advocating for cycling are from the middle to high income classes, though we did not see them in the survey. But it's still something that we need to confirm. But from the data, there are a lot of low income. But now there's a high cost of bicycle. I mean, they're expensive bicycles. I do see a lot of those online, but offline, it's quite different. I mean, I can't confirm. Sorry, I'm not sure if there is that notion.
It's a progressing research.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think we all have this interest. I have another questions, and feel free to actually write the questions to everybody to read. So with the initiative and infrastructure development implemented in Metro Manila, do you think safety and convenience of cyclists have been considered? And what impact have they had on promoting cyclists as a viable mode on transportation in the region?
If the infrastructure have considered the safety, I think to some degree they have, but we still see a lot of complaints. I think in terms of travel or transport behavior, it's when you don't protect your bicycle lanes, you will definitely see encroachment of cars. And I think it's not just happening in the Philippines, but everywhere there is a shared lane. So I think, to some degree it was considered, but not fully. I do understand from the governance perspective, they have limited space and they want to fit everyone. So this is an ongoing issue. And yes, I think it does affect this lack of, the proper sharing of the road does affect other people's choice to use bicycles.
Mm-hmm. Do you think has cycling really high in the agenda of the government?
Well, during the COVID, yes, we did see improvements. It's difficult to say based on the budget, because the budget for cycling is not high, right? So I do think they have established an office for that. Some local governments have also been quite active. I would say there was an improvement from previous years, but I'm not sure if like it's in the top 5 priorities. I don't have data to say that.
There are a couple more questions in the chat. So Thai is asking, in Europe, we see a massive change for conventional bikes to electric bikes, really fulfilling a gap, whereas with large volume of motorcycles and upcoming electric motorcycle, does that reduce the potential demand for cycling uptake?
Okay, large volumes of motorcycles. It's possible, for example, especially with the cost. I think the motorcycles, well, not electric here, are cheaper probably than some electric bicycles. So I think the primary driver would be the cost, especially from low income users. So yes, I think those could reduce the demand for cycling uptake. And as I mentioned earlier, some of the people who are cyclists now wanted to, if they could buy a motorcycle, they will shift to a motorcycle.
Yeah, I think we have these problems pretty much for the rest of Southeast Asia. In many countries, we actually now have a huge proportions of motorcycles, which brings some goods and some headache.
Yes.
Last questions. So there is from Marian Tinio, if you would advise an LGU towards encouraging shift from private car to use cycling, what would be your primary advice?
Okay, the $1 million. Well, definitely to improve your cycling infrastructure to make it really safe for all the users. So maybe doing a class 1 or class 2 type of bicycle lane, and also if you can. It has to be a comprehensive approach as well, because for example, if you promote it as a health measure, then the environment also has to be clean, like the air has to be clean. So you can't just say, oh, it's good for your health, and then they cycle and then it's polluted out there. So yeah, I guess I think that the first one would be to make sure that your cycling infrastructure are safe, and then the cyclists are supported at the destination in terms of facilities.
Great. Thank you very much, Sandy.
Okay, thank you so much.
And thank you very much again also for the audience who gave a very, very nice questions. So the next one would be Prateek Bansal. So he is an assistant professor at the Department of Civil Engineering and Environmental Engineering at National University of Singapore. He'll talk about eliciting socially acceptable decisions of autonomous vehicles using video experiments and brain data. Patrick? Prateek?
Thanks, Yusak. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for inviting for this seminar. And I'm going to talk about how do we use the brain data and different types of choice experiment to understand the ethical decisions that autonomous vehicles would make, should make, or may make. That is up to policymakers, but what we will try to do and understand is what are the socially acceptable decisions, and are there social biases that exist in those decisions. So this is many group members are involved in this. Vladimir especially helped in the EEG, Eugene helped in conceptualization, Ian, Leeken, and Kinney mainly helped in data collection. So it's multiple components of the project which are coming together, and big team is needed for that. So the main idea of our problem here is the trolley problem. Trolley problem is a well-known concept where a trolley is, if the trolley goes in a follow its own path, then it can kill the whole family of 6 or 7 people. But this guy in the green sweater has an option to change the direction of the trolley and just kill one person. So it's a dilemmatic situation, what to do in these situations. And they were not very common. I mean, they were not very common in transportation earlier, but with the prevalence of potentially autonomous vehicles in the future, I think these are real situations that autonomous vehicles are going to face. And what we think is in those situations, it's not just about objective decisions. There is no utility that people are maximizing. These are more of subjective beliefs, maybe some biases towards specific demographic groups that might be there in the society. And they might govern that, okay, this group might be affected or should be more likely to be hit by the autonomous vehicle in those situations. So there was a very big experiment that was done. It is called the moral machine experiment, and it happened in 2018. And there were follow-up papers, but there is not much work apart from these 2-3 big studies on this idea. So the main thing is when the information is ambiguous, then many internal factors such as subjective beliefs or personality, all these can pick up in the decision-making process. And there are external factors, which is the sensory information that the respondent is getting. So there is a combination of the internal and external factors that leads to the decision-making process and the final decision. So generally, the external factors trigger the bottom-up processing of the information, and the internal factors trigger the top-down processing of the information. And in the different parts of the areas, the neuroscience research tells that different parts of areas are responsible for bottom-up and top-down processes. So this understanding, this existing knowledge that there are some areas of the brain which are responsible for top-down and bottom-up process motivates us to really use the brain data to understand the decision-making process of the respondents while they decide these moral decisions. So this is the main motivation of using the brain data. So mainly there are 3 questions that we want to answer using the brain data, and really to see whether brain data is useful in answering these questions. So the first is, in moral decisions, can we learn whether the decision mechanism of the respondents that they are following is top down or bottom up? And this is important because if you look at the third research question, it is about, can we inform the behavioral models based on the decision mechanism? Because for different decision mechanisms, there will be different decision models. So if we can figure out those decision mechanisms from the subgroup of the population, we can use that information to make a very informed behavioral model. Because in the end, what we want, let's say we have a socially acceptable behavioral model that predicts the socially acceptable decisions of the autonomous vehicles, and let's say policymakers and everyone agrees with it. We want a very good out of sample prediction of that model. And to be able to do that, we need to have a model which is aligned with the decision rules of the people. And for that, we need to know the decision rules. And the hope is brain data can help us with that. Third part is understanding the right way to present information to the respondents. So all the previous experiments that we know in the moral choice situations are picture-based experiments. But we think that the picture-based experiments have very static information, and respondent has to put a lot of effort to really acquire that information. And maybe in those situations, the different combinations of the top-down and bottom-up factor play in. And in the video experiments, it might be different. So we will see whether there are some biomarkers in the brain which can help us in differentiating the information processing in the picture and the video-based experiments. So we will try to scratch on these some of these questions. For the last question, I will mainly talk about the framework because we just got the data last month and we are still working with it. But I'll just talk about the framework that we are thinking about to address the third question. So the plan is I'll talk about the experiment, how we simulate the trolley problem. And we carry out the video and picture-based experiment where the participant chooses to save one of the 2 pedestrians which are coming from the both sides of the road. So they have no choice, but they need to decide at least to hit one of the pedestrian. It will be more clear when I show the experiment clip. Then we will see whether the brain activity data really reflects the external internal factors and their interaction. We did some initial analysis and there are some indications of that. Then we compare the brain activity data in the video-based and the picture-based experiments. And there also we see some interesting differences that I'm going to talk about. And we also try to find some EEG biomarkers to describe the differences in the information processing across different groups. These groups can be based on the different attitudes as well, but as of now, we focus on the demographics of the respondent in this presentation for the simplicity. And finally, I'll discuss how we can really incorporate these EEG biomarkers into the choice models. So this is, I'm going to show the experiment briefly. This is the video-based experiment, and I'll briefly talk about the picture-based after that. So in this experiment, the autonomous vehicle is coming and the two pedestrians are coming on the both end, and the participant decide the steering of the autonomous vehicle, where they can steer it to the left and right and make the decision. And in this specific choice situation, you can see the left pedestrian is the child, male child, and the right pedestrian was old female. So this is how we created the video-based experiment. And when we presented this in the picture-based scenario, we show first the experiment situation, which is the before situation. And then after we show when the first left pedestrian is killed, and in the option 2, the right pedestrian is killed. So we show the screenshot of these two scenarios, and we ask which choice situation would you prefer, or your choice to hit, which pedestrian you would like to hit. And it was very difficult to get the IRB for this, approval for this, because our experiment had the sound and very interactive environment. We did this experiment as of now with 40 participants and 20 females, 20 males, and 20 participants engaged in the video experiments first, and then the text-based experiment just for the randomization. The trajectory of the autonomous vehicles is also randomized. In terms of the stimuli, we vary the age and the gender of the pedestrians. And if you consider like almost the full factorial design, it leads to around 15 scenarios, I think 16 or 15. And so what we do is we repeat these scenarios twice. And when we repeat the twice, we change the character, but keep the age and gender same. So this is how we do the repetition. So in some, each respondent experiences 30 picture-based situations and 30 video-based situations. And because the brain data that we collect is using EEG, dry EEG electrodes, so it's the calibration is quite fast. So in total, this experiment takes around 40 minutes per respondent, and we pay around $40 to each respondent for this experiment, which is quite high for students, but we decided to pay more to get good quality of the data. Okay. So let's first look at once we get this data collected, what kind of biomarkers we start with. So this is mainly for the preliminary analysis. We started looking at the event-related spectral power. To understand simply, it just means more processing, higher ERSP, more processing. And what we do is we look at it as 2 dimensions. One is the frequency and other is the zone. So frequency is, there are 3 frequency bands that we consider. In the zones, we consider 4 zones. So let's start to visualize those 4 zones, as I will be using them a little bit in next 2 slides. So if you look at the frontal zones, it's FP1, FP2, F3, FZ, and F4. These are the 5 electrodes that represent the processing in the frontal part of the brain. If you look at the central, this is C3, CZ, and C4. These are the electrodes corresponding to the central part. For the occipital, we have P3, P4, O1, and O2. And for the temporal F7T3T5 and F8T46. So just to be clear on, when I talk about the occipital, I'm talking about this part. When I'm talking about frontal, I'm talking about this part. When I'm talking about central, I'm talking about this part. So we observe the ERSP in basically frequency and zone. So first step is we try to see the data, the processing of the brain data in this experiment. So here we combine all the all the picture-based and the video-based data. And what we look at is, we first look at in the figure A, how the ERSP varies for theta band, alpha band, and beta band. So what figure A is saying is, alpha and beta, not much change, but theta ERSP, we see a substantial change. What it says is there is a more voluntary top-down process, and that is controlling the sensory information acquisition. So basically, more subjective beliefs are in process while the decisions are made. If we look at the spatial aspect of ERSP, in the figure B, we see that in the occipital, frontal, and the temporal dimensions, we see more higher ERSP compared to central. And when we plotted the topogram, we can see the similar phenomena. And it's a good sign, because these two parts, whatever parts you see in the little bit red region, these are the parts which are responsible for the coordination of the information processing and acquisition. And these are also coordination of the top-down and the bottom-up process. So what we can see here, yes, there is an interaction of the top-down and bottom-up processes, which is happening here. And one more thing that we can infer from the plot D is, if we look at the theta, alpha, and beta, again, the most of the ERSP is governed by theta. So if someone doesn't want to make things complicated, then they can even work with ERSP, because most of the ERSP is governed by the theta ERSP. So this is just to basically see that, yes, the brain data has some interesting insights about the interaction between the top-down and bottom-up processes. Now, if we look at the differences between the picture and the video-based scenes, in the alpha and beta, we don't see much differences in the ERSP, but we do see differences in the occipital area in the ERSP theta band in the picture-based experiment. What it means is, and if you look at the brain area as well, we see this occipital area to be lighten up in the picture-based experiment compared to the video-based scene. What it really means is participants involved in more top-down control, when they interact with the picture-based scenes, and they need to put voluntarily guided attention to acquire the decision information in the picture-based scenes. But this is very initial analysis. We need to delve deeper into it, like what are the other reasons and how the choices are different in the picture and video-based scene. But we still see some interesting initial evidence here. Then we look at the change in brain responses between different experimental conditions. So to understand this, what we are doing is, the top two figures are for the looking at the age of respondent in the heterogeneity in the information processing across the age of respondent in the picture-based and the video-based scene, and the bottom two are for the heterogeneity in the gender of the respondent. What the x-axis means is, if we talk about the age, that means that the two pedestrians who are approaching, only age is differing. Gender means only gender is differing. Age plus gender is both age and gender of two pedestrians are differing. So that's what the x-axis of these plots mean. So if we look at the age, there is no real difference in terms of the ERSP. At least we don't see the statistical difference in the picture and the video-based scenes. That is by looking at comparing the figure A and C. But gender does. So if you look at the gender in the plot B and D, gender has overall higher ERSP than the female has overall higher ERSP. Female have overall higher ERSP than male, but we can't infer much just based on the male-female higher or lower ERSP, because it's possible that there might be some anatomical differences and other differences. But what we can do is we can look at the ERSP between different situations within the gender, within the male or within the female. So what we see, male shows higher ERSP when deciding gender than age, but female shows same ERSP. And what it really means is maybe male needs more resources when deciding between based on gender than deciding on age. Maybe that means relatively less bias. So to see whether this is true or not, we look at the choice probabilities. So what we do is, what we are plotting here is the choice probability of hitting. On x-axis, we plotted for the choice condition age, only when the age of the pedestrian is differing, and the choice condition gender, when only the gender of two pedestrians are differing. And we look at the probability of hitting victims at the child, young, old, and the male and female on the right-hand side. So on the left-hand side, one thing is, by looking at these two plots, what is clear is there is a clear bias in the gender and age probabilities of hitting. So when deciding based on the age, it is clear they are most likely to save child, and the differences are not across male and female. But when we look at the only gender of the pedestrian is varying, and we look at the male and female biases, we can see that the bias is much higher in female and compared to the male. And overall, there is a very high probability to hitting a male compared to the female, which was surprising for us. And this is across both groups, less for the male respondents. So what it says is the lower bias in male might be reflected in the information processing that we discussed in the last slide, but we don't have very solid evidence yet. But the ultimate aim is to connect these choice probabilities with the information processing. But this is just, I would say, as of now, bit of a hand wavy claim that I would say. So what we have done is we have looked at that, okay, there are some information processing that we can learn about top-down, bottom-down interactions. We can find some biomarkers about the information processing in different presentation formats. We see information processing differences across genders that is related with the choice probabilities. But the point is the lab data is generally small. It has around, maximum 100 respondents or 200 respondents. And if we really want to use such behavioral models, we need to collect data from the bigger population. So idea is on the left-hand side, what we say is, okay, there is an internal factors, there are external factors, and all of that gives us some EEG biomarkers when we collect the data set. So once we identify the EEG biomarkers, they can help us in understanding the decision rules that people are making, like are people making more random decisions, or are these EEG biomarkers are also associated with some of the attitudinal variables that can be collected in the field. So the main idea is connecting these decision rules, biomarkers, as well as the demographics and the attitudes of respondents, and use this mapping to predict sort of the decision rules in the online data, and using those predicted decision rules to create the behavioral models in the online data. But we are still working on it. We have a long way to go, but we are working toward this objective and see how it goes. So in summary, there is an interaction between top-down and bottom-up processes that we can figure out, but obviously top-down dominates. We found the biomarkers in the presentation format, and we see there is a hope of finding neurobiomarkers of information processing, which can help us in informing the decision rules among subgroup of population in out-of-lab or online choice experiments. Thank you. Happy to answer if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Prateek. Very interesting presentations. We already immediately got 2 questions.
Thank you.
So one, would it be a viable alternative to include steer away from pedestrian and crash with any building or structure?
Absolutely, there are multiple combinations that can be included, and absolutely this is one of them. But this was the first experiment, so we decided to keep it simple. Then there can be, and this is same as like whether you want to hurt your own driver, or you can say passenger or pedestrian who is on the road. So that choice is there, and this is something we can explore if we have an ability to, if we find very good graphic designer who can simulate these kind of situations in the video-based situations. Yeah,
and the second one is understanding the decision-making through brain data could lead to establishing baseline for general social decisions-making mechanisms as to how an individual would react in this lose-lose choice scenario. Will this be used to advise autonomous vehicles decision-making ethical form?
Right, so that's a good question, and this is a question that policymakers will ask, but I think this is a question for them to answer, whether they want the AI systems to react according to the social norms. Do they want them to react randomly, or do they want them to react in a different way? So I think what our model is saying, if they want that system to react in a social acceptable way, then what will be the probability of autonomous vehicle to make a decision to hit one of the pedestrians? It can also tell, if you put a different decision rule, how off it will be from the social acceptable decisions. So that is also very important information that you can extract from such a model. So in that sense, even if you don't want to use this model directly, you know that how far you are if you are using some other model or some other heuristic to make a decision. You can see how bad that heuristic is compared to the behavioral model, which is more socially acceptable.
Any other questions to us? I have a question, Prateek. Thomas, yes, Thomas, please do. Thomas, you raise your hand.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I've actually got several questions. I'm not going to all of them, but I'll just try and say the most important ones. So firstly, the fact that males were saved more is interesting. Oh yeah, there's my camera working now. Yeah, so the fact that males were saved more is interesting because that was not the case in the Awad et al. Paper with the more machine data. And I think specifically it was females were generally preferred by ratio, sort of like 10% more or so. But I suspect, because it was such a large experiment, there would be the data from Singapore in that data set. So I wondered if you'd looked specifically at that subset of data just to see how it compared to yours, because there will be that specific demographic, because you're saying whether it's maybe something different here. So that's one thing. Then the second thing was with regards to your modeling approach. So Charisma and I published a paper recently looking specifically at the various different ways you can incorporate physiological sensor data into modeling. And our main conclusion from that is that you really have the sort of 2 key options, which are the sort of hybrid approach, where, you know, the main difficulty is there enough things to explain the physiological sensor data if you've got limited demographic information, whatever, or there's the approach of trying to use the physiological sensor data to explain the choices, but then of course, you know, that's sometimes potentially biased. So I wondered what you thought about those issues there.
We still need to, thanks for the first suggestion. I think that's a good one. So we will certainly look at the Singapore part in that data. For the second one, yes, indeed, we do not have enough variation at this moment. And that's why I guess there is a need to go beyond the lab-based experiment. But in terms of across the, I mean, we haven't explored so much yet, but I think by looking at just the age and gender differences that we are getting, those are quite pronounced. If the differences are pronounced, we can easily find the biomarkers for the decision rules. So, I mean, we will get to know about those issues a little bit later, I guess, in a month or so, if they are. So maybe when you meet Vladimir in a psychology conference
Yes,
in
that's
July,
yeah.
and you might, I mean, we might tell you a little bit more about if we also encounter some of these issues or not.
Okay. Oh, great. Okay. Perfect.
Yeah. Thanks, Thomas.
No problem.
Thanks, Thomas. So we have the questions, and probably the last for this sessions is from Glenn Latonero. Oh, Abdul also two more questions. Last, please. Then how does the processing of information in automated vehicles contribute to their ability to make socially acceptable decisions? And what factors should be considered to ensure that these vehicles prioritize safety and ethical considerations while navigating complex traffic scenario?
The second one is, I guess, a bit of a subjective question, but the first one is, I think, something I can certainly answer more objectively. So first one, the thing is, the main idea is if we can identify the decision rules, or if we find a mapping between the decision rules of socio-demographics and the decision rule, then we can predict the decision rule and consider, after predicting the decision rule, we can use the appropriate behavioral model. So what we are predicting as a social decision model, the predictability will improve. So the predictability of the model will improve if we use the right decision rule, because that informs the choice of the behavioral model for the specific subgroup of the people. So that's the reason it is important to understand the information process. Yes.
And
for the second one, I'll pass. Yeah.
And the last questions from Abdul.
Yeah.
Let me try to get the question back. So as I understand it, the picture-based scene seems to require the individuals to voluntarily examine the various aspects of the scene. The video scenes, on the other hand, dynamically steer the individual attentions to various aspects on the situation. Is that correct interpretation?
Yes, that's absolutely correct interpretation. We had this hypothesis even before looking at the EEG data, and EEG data actually validates that hypothesis.
Super.
And yeah,
and
I think that's the last part of the question.
And also, does the EEG response to either scene, video or picture, change if the individual had more time with the picture or video?
We need to check that. We need to look at the response time and look at the EEG data within the different response time windows. But yeah, this is a very next thing that we are planning to do. Just a very next thing.
Yeah, actually, that was also my questions, because in Vienna we also have this experiment, and in our experience, I think we need to actually give people some time until the reading is actually quite stable. But I'll get back to you on that later on. So I think because of the time, and actually I'm very happy that all the audience are actually very active. So thank you again, Prateek. And now we will move to Fajar. So Fajar is an assistant professor at the School of Business and Management at IATBR in Bandung, and his presentations would be focused on potential demands of urban air mobility in Indonesia, case studies of Bandung City. Fajar.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Can you see my presentation?
I can see your presentation. Thanks.
And my voice clear?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending the webinar. Thank you also, Yusak, for the opportunity to present our research in this IATBR webinar series. So the research that I'm presenting here is conducted with my colleagues, which I wrote here, Maya Safira, Yosunitioso, Cynthia Nurliana, Faridian Wirayat, and also Ardana Sharif. Yeah. The title, as you can see, Potential Demand of Urban Air Mobility in Indonesia, Case Study of Bandung City. So how do we came up with this UAM idea? I will tell in the next slide. Yeah. Okay, so these are the contents of the presentation from the introduction to the conclusion section. Okay, yeah. Next, we start from this paper. Actually, this is the paper by Anugrah Ilahi, me, Milos Balak, and also Kayat Susan. At that time, we want to understand travel and mode choice of people in Great Jakarta, Indonesia. So the survey that we conducted was before the pandemic and before MRT Jakarta actually was launched. We got around 5,000 respondents. One of the mode that become alternative in this paper is urban air mobility. So it's actually something new at that time, and we just want to check if it's can be accepted in Jakarta case. Yeah, at that time, the on-demand transport, the car-based and motorcycle-based ride-hailing were very popular. What we find here is UAM, urban air mobility, has the potential to be developed, although it might be suitable only for high-income resident and long-distance travel. This was also the question by the reviewer at that time. Congestion in Jakarta also provide an advantage for UAM over other alternatives like car or train or BRT. Okay, the potential demand for UAM in Greater Jakarta during the survey was estimated to be approximately 1% of the total population, which around 300,000 people. So that's the first idea. And then next, we actually have the first high-speed railway that connect Jakarta and Bandung. We call this Kereta Cepat Jakarta-Bandung. So in bracket KCGB, or to make it easier, we just call it high-speed railway. It was easier. It aims to connect the capital city Jakarta with Bandung through a high-speed train network. So KCGB or HSR will boost the economic growth in Indonesia by improving travel time between Jakarta and Bandung with rail transportation system. So this is an alternative solution that is projected to reduce travel time from Jakarta to Bandung to be less than 30 minutes with 300 km per hour, which is actually 3-hour travel by car or also 3-hour travel by train. So this was a paper by my colleague Zudi Rawan and Faza. So they find that, they study the demand for HRSR from Jakarta Bandung. At present, there are only 2 alternative modes if we want to travel faster between Bandung, Jakarta, and vice versa. So they are train and also car via the toll road. So therefore, in this study, they conducted a stated choice experiment with 3 alternatives: high-speed rail, train, and also car. They found that the demand for HSR comes from existing intercity train. So user with high income level. Okay, this another keyword, high income level. The demand of HSR is expected to reach 12.2 million passengers per year in 2050. And as I mentioned before, reduce the travel time. So with that, we have 2 things that UAM actually there is a potential demand in Jakarta, and second, there is a high-speed rail that connects Jakarta to Bandung. And then if you can see in this picture, so this is Jakarta, the number 1 here. Halim is a starting point from Jakarta. The number 2, Karawang, is actually the satellite city of Jakarta, where this is an industrial area. And the third stop is actually also satellite city of Bandung. So currently, the high-speed rail will stop here, and probably next month they will start running from Jakarta, Bandung, and vice versa. So the last one, Tegaluar Station, here is also the satellite city, and then 5 is the Bandung CBD. So this is assumed to be the final destination for those who travel from Jakarta to Bandung. Yeah, this is the map of Bandung city. So again, this is the train station of Padalarang, the one with number 3 from last slide, and this is the one with number 4. This will be operated next month. So when we design this research, we still have the impression that the final destination will be here. So therefore, in our research, we focus on the accessibility from this station to the Bandung CBD, to the CBD area. As we can see here, there are kind of like 3 alternatives. The blue one is the BRT, the yellow one is the car, and the green one is a local train. So yeah, there are accessibility issues to reach the Bandung CBD area. For example, the limited transportation option, and during the peak traffic condition, it still takes approximately 1 hour from station to reach the central business CBD of Bandung. So even if we already have the high-speed rail which run 30 minutes, but we still need 1 more hour. So almost not so different with the local train, normal train from Jakarta to Bandung. And that's where there are several alternative modes. So, for example, the on-demand transport system like car ride hailing and motorcycle, the BRT and the train, and also this is the public transport. Then came the UAM. So because of the increasing congestion worldwide, there is an interest in urban air mobility as viable alternative, including in Indonesia. As you know, the idea comes from the case in Jakarta, and also we want to test if it is also okay to put it in Bandung. So yeah, high income household, again, another keyword. So the objectives are to find out user preference for UAM transportation accommodation for other public transport option, and to understand the attribute that influence individual choice decision about various transportation choice. So we have kind of like 5 alternatives. This is our stated choice experiment. We do the stated choice experiment. We decide about the alternative. First is UAM. Second is BRT. The existing one is BRT, car ride hailing, local train, and private car. So if you ask us why don't you put motorcycle or motorcycle taxi, because we assume that the one that use the high-speed rail is mostly high-income people, which rarely use motorcycle or motorcycle ride hailing. Therefore, we omit those 2 alternatives. So we have these 5 alternatives. We have the attribute and attribute level, travel time, waiting time, and so on. The attribute level for these 4 alternatives, we check it with Google Map and also with the current price. But for UAM, we use from the paper of Ilahi et al. In 2020. Yeah, this is after we have the alternative, attribute of alternative, and their specific level. The next thing is to make the choice task. So we conducted the efficient design in engine to make the choice task. We have 32 choices tasks that we divided into 4 blocks. Therefore, each respondent will get 8 scenario each to reduce the response burden. And this is the example of the scenario. So for example, the left one here is the station, the final stop of the high-speed rail. And in Asia Africa, we assume this is the CBD area of Bandung. So we show this to our respondent, And then the blue one is actually the travel time. If you can see that for the UAM, the travel time is actually very short. And then we also give the travel time, the waiting time, and also the cost. Sorry, I put it in Indonesian rupiah. And in the right-hand side is the total time and also the total cost for this travel. So for the BRT, we also have the green one. It's actually access and egress from the station to the next BRT stop. Also the same for the train, because apparently the final destination of the high-speed rail is not in the place of the train. So after we conducted the survey, we also asked the respondent about their socio-demographic, age, income, gender, and so on. We also asked about their current travel behavior. If they travel from Jakarta to Bandung, what mode they use to go to the city center, travel frequency, travel purpose, option modes, and travel time. And then, yeah, we do the MNL. Sorry, I have to use this one.
Okay, yeah, I start again. So we were planning to get 2,000 respondents, but until last week we only got 1,000 respondents. So the research is still continuing. So this is the result so far. Yeah. So we got 1,000 participants in total. We have like 8,000 observations for the MNL model. Okay, so these are the descriptive analysis. We have 45% male and 55% female. For the place of living, mostly live in West Java. This is actually Bandung, and this is Jakarta and the satellite city. Age is dominated by 25 to 30 years old. And then the occupation mostly a full-time employee, because those who travel Jakarta-Bandung mostly are the workers. So these are the transport mode option that they use from Jakarta to Bandung, including the first mile, last mile. Yeah. So we have a taxi, on-demand transit, we have BRT, train and private car. So because one person can choose more than one mode in here. And the travel purpose mostly here vacation, but also there is a work and so on. And the travel frequency mostly 2 and 3 times a month and 4 to 5 times a month. So this is the result of our choice experiment. Yeah. So from 8,000 observation, we can see that 37% of the observation choose urban air mobility, and then 23% choose the car, 17 choose train and BRT, and the last one is car ride hailing. So we also look at the non-trading behavior. So non-trader meaning that for 8 scenario, they choose the same alternative. So meaning there is no trade-off. So it's interesting that from 1,000 participant or 1,000 respondent, among 160 actually choose UAM. Yeah? So we have 160 non-traders among 1,000 respondents. So these are the model result. So we can see that car ride hailing and also train significant negative against the UAM. So meaning that they, all else being equal, they prefer UAM over these modes. And the demand for UAM will further increase if travel costs remain affordable. That's we assume, because travel cost here is negative significant, meaning that the higher the cost, the less likely they choose the alternative, including UAM. And alternative transportation mode, particularly train, is less desirable due to negative significance of access time and waiting time to reach the city center. So we also included socio-demographic in our model. Yeah. So here we found UAM is favored by younger individual, while older individual opted for alternative modes. Both males and females show similar preference for using urban air mobility. OAM is a preferred choice for residents of West Java, Bandung, and Banten. Banten is a city, province near Jakarta, whereas residents of Jakarta lean towards alternatives such as BRT, trains, and private cars. So individual with high income and full employment, not the part-time, tend to prefer UAM over other transportation modes. And here for travel purpose and travel frequency, UAM will be the primary choice for individual commuting to the city center for work, followed by those returning to Bandung for their home and studies. UAM is the preferred option for individual who travel to Bandung more than 4 times a month. So here are our key findings up to this point. I say up to this point since we are expecting another 1,000 respondents. So UAM is the optimal choice for accessing downtown Bandung due to its shorter travel time compared to other alternatives. We assume that the demand for UAM will further increase if the travel costs remain affordable, since most of the users of high-speed rail are the high-income people. So UAM is favored by younger individuals, while older individuals opt for other alternative modes. Individuals with high income and employment tend to prefer UAM over other transportation modes. And UAM will be the primary choice for individuals commuting to the city center for work, followed by those returning to Bandung for their home and study. In our survey, if I remember correctly, we also asked for the workers who travel from Jakarta and Bandung whether they will be paid by their employer to do the work travel. So in that case, the UAM price can also be zero in the model. So the conclusion up to this point, we see that there is a lack of prior research examining the impact of connecting high-speed rail usage with the implementation of UAM service to the city center in Indonesia, I can say. I don't dare to say in other developed countries, but maybe there, or maybe I haven't seen it. But yeah, there is a lack of prior research because the study of UAM, we only conducted it in Jakarta case. But I don't know if there is another one. Maybe I need to check again. Maybe we need to check. And second, we suggest that travel time and cost attribute had a negative impact, significant across all modes. We highlight the positive aspect of implementing UAM to support. Sorry, I haven't changed this one. This is the old abbreviation, KCGB, or high-speed rail, offering flexible alternative mode for accessing the central business area of Bandung. Industrial stakeholders could consider the influence of socio-demographic on the perception of UAM service. And UAM is more preferable for business trip rather than daily commutes. The last one, regulatory and infrastructure requirements are crucial for ensuring proper UAM service in the CBD area of Bandung. So this is the station and this is the CBD, hopefully like this. Okay, I think maybe that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for Fajar. Very interesting. And we have questions. Is it possible to transform the last stations of high-speed rail in Bandung into a multimodal transport hubs so travelers can travel between modes more conveniently?
Okay, so let me check again. Yeah, I think it's possible, but we haven't used that in our scenario. But maybe in our next research, we will try to accommodate that. Thank you. Very interesting.
Very interesting. Any other questions? I have one question. I have seen a number of these urban air mobility simulations now, at least in Europe, they're also growing. I noticed that they assumes that this is just another mode with exactly the same waiting time, access time, etc. I just wonder about your visions. Would it be the same? So it's basically just a change of different modes, or it would be something else, like now if we travel by plane, we actually need to spend a hell lot of time just to accessing it.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, if we travel by plane, as you said, we have to do a lot of check in and do a lot of like baggage claim and many things, and then actually it takes more time. Yeah, but I'm not sure actually, because we haven't seen the practice of UAM in Indonesia, and perhaps it can be faster, perhaps it can be lower. I'm really not sure at this point, but the thing is, actually currently there is in Soekarno-Hatta, actually in Jakarta airport, there is an alternative of helicopter, which is actually very expensive, and some people actually use it to travel from the Jakarta airport to the CBD area of Jakarta. And it seems that it didn't really take long time, like if we use a commercial plane.
Okay.
So perhaps it's not as long as the commercial plane, but this is for the urban area, and I think people will still use it because of the short travel time compared to the other modes, and to avoid traffic congestion. But we are not sure, so we just still trying to understand this. But actually, I just want to add one more interesting thing. So I was contacted by one of the researcher that focus on the, so we are from the demand side. So actually someone from the supply side tried to contact me, and then he said, this guy is from Indonesia also. It's very interesting that the paper that we conduct with Ilahi and also Kayakshausen. So he actually read that paper, and he thinks that there is a potential to introduce urban air mobility in Indonesia. So in Bandung maybe. So he's from the supply side, meaning that he knows the technical and he knows about the engineering side of the plane, which I actually don't know. I only for the demand side. Yeah.
Right.
Maybe that.
Thank you. So just one last question. So because we almost finished. So the questions from Muklis. So basically he asking whether this air mobility is actually a sustainable solutions to promote, whether we should actually promote something else, for example, like public transport or active modes like cycling. So how much actually this development have addressed safety and health concerns, and whether you actually have any reference success stories, in particular the implementations of this urban air mobility.
Yeah, very interesting question, because this webinar actually it's IATBR with Southeast Asia chapter, which try to show the rest of the world the current travel behavior or the problem of the Southeast Asian nation. Yeah, maybe particularly Indonesia, because I don't know Singapore or Philippine context before I joined this seminar. So that is for the further research, because we have a lot of homework regarding how to introduce a sustainable transportation mode, how we try to improve, how we try to save people from private transport like car or motorcycle to public transport. Recently, public transport in Indonesia, in Jakarta particularly, they change from the combustion engine to the electric, so electric based. So it's become more environmental friendly for those who concerned with the environment. They can change to the electric car or electric public transport. And yeah, I think this is also another research that how we can shift the behavior from motorcyclists, because most of the mode share in Jakarta and Bandung is motorcycle. So that's very interesting. And yeah, regarding whether I have checked about the safety, I haven't. So we will do that. Thank you.
All right, so thank you very much again. Thank you very much to the speakers, to Sandy, Prateek, and also Fajar, and also thank you for everybody who have attended. Basically, in IATBR, we try to actually reaching out and kind of highlighting a different travel behavior across different part of the world. So the next one, what we actually plan, we will move to South America. So keep in tuned. And also in IATBR, we have this Triennial conference. So the next one would be in Vienna in 2024. And if you're interested and want to present something, please don't forget to submit an extended abstract. And the deadline would be 15th of August. So you can go to this IATBR2024.org. And for this IATBR conference, we will have discount for the developing countries participant. So without any further ado, thank you very much again. And then I wish you a very nice rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.